Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, June 30th, 2023, and today we are going to be talking about Ron DeSantis and the state of New Hampshire. From the title of this video, you can tell that we are talking about how Ron DeSantis started out being in the positive in New Hampshire, being in a good position heading into the upcoming primary just next year. Now, Ron DeSantis since then has seen a dramatic fall in polling numbers from this battleground state in the Republican primary side. And the reason why it's so important is because it is one of the many first four. It's included in the states of Nevada, South Carolina, New Hampshire, and the state of Iowa, in which they serve to be the four most important and first contests for the Republican Party as early indicators about the future of the nomination race. Now, Ron DeSantis started out with this very strong advantage in the state of New Hampshire. Earlier this year, he led Donald Trump in polls across the state, which meant that he was on track to, at least in some people's eyes, do quite well within this state. Well, after a number of articles have been released about Ron DeSantis' inefficiencies when it comes down to the state of New Hampshire, namely in terms of the endorsement battle that we have seen and the feud that Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis have expressed between each other for quite some time now, has started to make this race turn away from Ron DeSantis and in favor of the former president. Now, even specifically with this endorsement fight, to provide a bit of context, because I think it doesn't exactly explain itself well in the title here, Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump announced endorsements from state legislators across the state of New Hampshire. And in some cases, their endorsement list conflicted, meaning that there were state representatives that had endorsed both Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. And when questioned about it by the mainstream media, they reported back in most cases that they were either backing Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis in a crazy two-way endorsement, or they were actually endorsing, get this, President Donald Trump. You see, many of these people signed on to this endorsement that Ron DeSantis reached out to them right when he announced his campaign. And early discussions really pushed Ron DeSantis to even enter into the race by some of these people that have now endorsed Donald Trump. And I think the reason why some of the New Hampshire Republicans were more on time or more on track to endorse Ron DeSantis in the past was because of this University of New Hampshire poll that was taken back in January of 2023. Roughly 6 months ago, Donald Trump was losing to Ron DeSantis across the state of New Hampshire. It was the first poll conducted in the state since the battleground midterm elections, in which you saw numerous losses for the Trump-endorsed Republicans across the United States: Blake Masters, Kari Lake, Doug Mastriano, Dr. Oz, Herschel Walker. The list goes on. And voters immediately recognized that, or at least in the immediate aftermath. Donald Trump's numbers tanked from being up 30 points prior to the midterms to being up by just 10 points, 30 to 10, a 20-point reduction. And in the state of New Hampshire, you saw Donald Trump's lead go from October 2022, before the midterms, up 25 in New Hampshire, 2021, up 25 in New Hampshire. June 2022, he was losing to Ron DeSantis by 2, but it was still a competitive race. Then fast forward to January, Ron DeSantis came to be this consolidation candidate where Mike Pence's support went from 9 down to 1, and it seems as if that was shifted in favor of Ron DeSantis. He was up by 12. But in the most recent University of New Hampshire poll, done in April 2023, right when Donald Trump was ramping up his attacks against Governor DeSantis, he was down 20 points across the Granite State. 20 percentage points from a poll that 3 months ago had him up by 12, nearly a 32-point turnaround that is roughly equivalent to the turnaround that we have seen on the national level in favor of Donald Trump. Now, New Hampshire is just a particular case, or at least so it seems. Unfortunately for Ron DeSantis, New Hampshire was proven to be one of the only real opportunities as an opportunity to win in this primary in the first four. In Iowa, Donald Trump had maintained a significant lead for quite some time. In New Hampshire, that's where Ron DeSantis was going to strike, and today, on average, he's down roughly 31 points across this state. In South Carolina, you can see here that Donald Trump leads by a margin of 22 points across the state of South Carolina, and in Nevada, Donald Trump leads by 32 points across the state. So what we find here is a number of fascinating results from these early primary states that show Ron DeSantis losing to Donald Trump. He desperately needed a victory out of the Big Four because they helped indicate the trajectory of the race. If Iowa went to Donald Trump immediately in 2016, I have no doubt in my mind that that primary would have been wrapped up a lot earlier. But instead, it went to Ted Cruz. It halted the inevitable, undoubtedly, but what it did was allowed Ted Cruz to be second place. If he was blown out of the water or even received second place, the narrative would have been that the primary was always Donald Trump's to win. Rather, this time around, what we saw in retrospect, and this time, is that it's Donald Trump's primary, but there's still a lot of other factors. At least that was 2016. Today, this is now his primary to win. The narrative has been built that it is Donald Trump's race to lose. That's not how it was in 2016. He started off in single digits when he first announced his bid. So what I take away from these early numbers across the 4 states is that DeSantis desperately needs a state to win in. And it looks like amongst them all, he's actually performing the second worst in the state of New Hampshire. The worst being the state of Nevada. It's just fascinating that a state that DeSantis has invested so much time and effort in, even now doing this public town hall, his first town hall of the presidential election in a state that he is losing to the former president by 27 points on average. It's embarrassing, to say the least, for Ron DeSantis because this is a state where he otherwise should have been able to do quite well. And even some of these other pollsters that haven't been so kind to President Trump in the past with polling numbers still can't seem to find a lead for Ron DeSantis. And in some cases, like American Greatness, he's actually only at 12% across the state. So there's a lot at play here. There's a lot in consideration, a lot that I see and I think about, and I'm like, okay, reflecting on where Ron DeSantis was, what went wrong? And we've been talking about this. We've been trying to autopsy Ron DeSantis' race for quite some time now because it looks as if it's just dead on arrival. And that term is frequently used. I think we use it far too often. But Ron DeSantis took what was an amazing, brilliant opportunity for an outsider, non-incumbent treated president, because Donald Trump's not the incumbent, but he's treated as such, who could have been within striking distance and defeated President Trump in this race. Unfortunately, that is not what is happening here because Donald Trump has reclaimed the narrative. Let's take a look at these 3 most recent polls that show him improving of where he was before. In fact, all of the recent polls, you go from a low point at 43, still leading by 21, and a high at 61%. It's so exceptionally interesting that this is the way the 2024 nomination has gone, but I can't say we didn't expect it. It might be interesting, but it was entirely predicted. But there was that period of time that even myself, in this capacity, thought that Ron DeSantis was well within a reasonable chance at beating Donald Trump in the primary. That maybe the grip that Donald Trump had on voters within the Republican side had weakened and that he would lose the nomination to Ron DeSantis. I am clearly seeing that narrative was wrong, or maybe it was just right at the time. I told you about this earlier on in the video. We talked about how following the 2022 midterms, Donald Trump went from leading into the midterms up 31 points. Polls hit, he drops down to 18. He goes back up to a 22-point lead, but then it starts to tank. Down to 18, down to 14, down to 13, down to 12 across the states, across the United States. A 12-point advantage at Donald Trump's low point. Today, he stands with a 31-point advantage. So a big difference between where he was and where he is now. And keep in mind that Donald Trump had already been an announced candidate. This was when I thought that Ron DeSantis should ride this wave, boost himself up a few more points that puts him within single digits of the former president, narrows that field, and maintains it, plateaus it, keeps your base there. But Ron DeSantis has lost support. And the reason is that because he wasn't entered into the race, number one, I think by not entering into the race following Donald Trump's announcement, it gave Donald Trump free and total reign at attacking him that Ron DeSantis could not respond to. In fact, he did not respond to. There is a problem with being someone who technically is not running for president, is that you cannot run without announcing. Ron DeSantis tried, but obviously he couldn't say, my war room is going to respond to Donald Trump's claims and whatever it might be. The problem lied in the fact that he had to play it civil because he couldn't lead on that he was about to announce a bid. So when he was at 30 points, Donald Trump realized, holy crap, the guy that I propped up for, this governorship in Florida is now within 10 points, 15 points of beating me. So I'm going to attack him. And you know what? With those attacks, boom, support lost. And lost, and lost and lost. And people argue it's the inclusion of other candidates into the race. And fairly, maybe, right? Ron DeSantis was viewed as this anti-Trump candidate. And to be fair, Donald Trump has only seen an increase of maybe 10% of more voters. But that's still significant. I don't think that the entrance of many other candidates really changed the trajectory of the race that much. I do think it's a problem for Ron DeSantis that if the remaining never-Trump candidates, as they are seen, don't drop out, that he has no shot at winning a singular primary with the exception of maybe Utah. But at the end of the day, this campaign was one that was very winnable, and it no longer seems as such. So when we reflect, and I think in a few months we will start to, or in a year from now, when Ron DeSantis inevitably has to drop out of the race, we have to look back at how this race went. How it went from being this DeSantis-Trump top two to Trump all the way up and DeSantis at the bottom with the remaining candidates in low single digits, and how Ron DeSantis went from being, again, this person who was on track to have a breakthrough in New Hampshire, as Politico puts it, to losing the state by 40 points come the next primary. I mean, it will be some of the strongest political miscalculations of any primary season. I think Ron DeSantis will really, really take one of those top spots because what we have seen is just campaign malpractice. I don't say this to try to criticize the governor's character or the way that he, has presented himself. I don't think it's entirely his fault. I think that those who were advising him should have told him that he should have announced, and maybe they did, and maybe he didn't listen. I'm not here to assign blame, but what I am to do is write or discuss this analysis of the primary and see exactly how someone who was seen as this major contender that Democrats, quite frankly, were terrified about. You look at the 2024 numbers and you see that Ron DeSantis does better than Donald Trump in numerous statewide polls. You can see even some of those most recent ones. Wisconsin, Marquette University showed Donald Trump losing to Joe Biden by 9 points amongst the same electorate. Ron DeSantis only loses by 2. And knowing the history of Marquette and its polling and the last election, Joe Biden will significantly underperform these numbers, which means he'll probably win by 2 against Trump, but lose amongst the same electorate to DeSantis by roughly 4 points. That is the trade-off here. DeSantis is still electable. He's still, I guess, they're both electable, but DeSantis is more electable. Now, in New Hampshire, you virtually don't see much of a shift. This was an interesting number here. But regardless, though, DeSantis isn't the less electable candidate. NBC News did a national poll that, again, amongst the same exact group of voters, the same people that preference Biden by 4 points over Trump, have a tie between DeSantis and Biden. There are voters out there that are Biden against Trump, but DeSantis against Biden. Those are those independent voters that DeSantis is desperately trying to make the plea to the GOP that look at the numbers. I am the most electable candidate, but unfortunately for him, the voters don't care. And I think what we are finding is that Ron DeSantis putting himself out there is only hurting him. It seems as if, and I say this not to try again to knock him, but it seems as if the more that Ron DeSantis puts himself out there, the more that he loses. Quite frankly, the polling numbers indicate that the larger the presence of Ron DeSantis in New Hampshire, in Iowa, on the national scale, make him worse off for the Republican Party. It's fascinating because we've never seen a candidate that has continuously made himself less and less likable as the campaign has gone on. But, maybe that's just the nature of the race. Maybe that is damage done by Donald Trump and we are trying to make this justification and drawing conclusions that because Ron DeSantis is out there and his numbers are dropping, that it's solely because of that. I recognize there are flaws in the logic, but what I do say to that is that politics is the culmination of everything. Ron DeSantis absolutely has spoken to voters, spoken at the town hall, and lost support. Candidates have that effect. And in this case, it seems like Ron DeSantis has that particular effect, and it's coupled with the fact that Donald Trump is feeding this narrative on Truth Social, feeding this narrative through surrogates, on Gabber, on Twitter, whatever it might be, and reaching these voters that may not believe the rhetoric at face value, but see Ron DeSantis on the media. They see the attack ads and they start to question, okay, Donald Trump has already planted the seed that this guy doesn't care about us, that Ron DeSantis is not in touch with the voters in the way that Donald Trump is, and that he is not being loyal to the former president. Loyalty is a big thing, I think, amongst Republican voters, and you see that the message resonates well because it's the reason Donald Trump keeps hammering it in, and it keeps improving his numbers. They see that, and at face value, maybe they don't believe it. But with Ron DeSantis going out there and sometimes taking shots at Donald Trump, the campaign going against him with the war room, they're only, they only believe that narrative more. Donald Trump plants the seed. Ron DeSantis waters it and lets it blossom. And that's the problem for Ron DeSantis at this point in time, that this is true. It isn't the only thing that's dragging him down, but it is in fact a reality of the matter that the more that voters see Ron DeSantis, the less likable he is and the less electable he is both for the primary and the general election. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 Republican primary election videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.